All right, well, let's get started. Open up to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce a topic. Today we're going to be talking about LUIs. You've heard of DUIs. You know what LUIs are? Living under the influence. That's what we've been titled today. Living under the influence of Christ's love. And how we kind of come to this conclusions. Paul addresses this in this passage. I want to start first by talking about conclusions and how they create transitions. Right? Sometimes we look at the word conclusion as a stopping point, but it's really, it can be used as a transitive word, and it has, even though it has implications of being a fulfillment or a stopping point, it can actually be used to move us forward. Like when World War II came to a stop, what happened? Rebuilding started. And so there was a transition that happened from the time that something was concluded to the time that rebuilding started. This morning you woke up and you concluded that you were coming to church, unless against your own free will, your spouse drug you here. You concluded you were going to church, right? You made a transition to come to church. There was a decision that reacted in a forward-moving. Were you drugged here or dragged here? Drugged you.
He's always drugged here.
But likewise, it's the end of the year, right? And you may have concluded that this year, 2015, wasn't the best of years, and you want to make some changes. You want to transition into some new ways of living. And so conclusions can actually create transitions. They can create a point of moving forward, a point from which you move forward. 2 Corinthians 5:14 and 15 says, "For the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. And he died for all, that those who might live no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised again." You see, Paul had come to the conclusion that because Christ died for him, he could no longer live for himself. If we said that differently, the love displayed from Christ impacted him so profoundly that it changed his entire purpose and way of living. He transitioned based on his new conclusions. We know that Paul, he didn't always have this same way of living, the same conclusion, right? He held to a different conviction about Christ. It was the very opposite, in fact. I'm certain that if anyone from his past would have been around right when Paul was writing these words, I concluded that the love of Christ controls me. But they would have surely thought that Paul was out of his mind, thought that maybe he'd gone into the high priest stash of special wine and was sipping on something. Like, Paul, what has come over you? This is not the Paul that we know. You're talking about the love of Christ is controlling you? 20 years previous, Paul's conclusion was that this man who had now changed his heart was the absolute scum of the world. He had one main mission before, and that was to utterly destroy the Christian movement so that we wouldn't be here today to worship. He wanted to ensure that nobody would ever represent or speak of the name Jesus. And because of this mission, his status with the Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin is the collection of Jewish religion people, priests and rulers, had been so elevated as he became kind of their agent to carry out some of this lawlessness. So he was gaining respect and gaining a lot of status with these group of people. He was the first person to authorize the murder of a Christian Stephen, if you remember, in Acts 8:1. And this in of itself just creates this great scattering of the church. And he really thinks that because of this conclusion he has on Christ, his belief on Christ, is that he has found God's purpose on his life. He has a new mission statement for it, and that is to rid the earth of Christianity. He begins going door to door looking for anyone who professes Christ so that he can imprison them and hopefully execute them. Anybody see American Sniper this past summer? You know, maybe some other military movie where they go door to door. I mean, it's a painful, excruciating process for both the soldiers and the recipients. But in there's a powerful scene where the Navy SEAL and the Marines, they go into a door, and the place is supposed to be empty. Nobody's supposed to be in this town, especially a male. And so they barge into this door, and there's a male, and it's just all of a sudden absolute chaos breaks out. They detain the husband, the guy, they throw him to the ground. There's a lot of force going on. There's chaos In the family, everybody's screaming, and the women and the children are. And then all of a sudden, in the background comes another teenage boy, and they have to detain him too. And so this whole uproar is just keeps intensifying, and it's all unfolding before their eyes. And Paul now, of course, he didn't have any Navy SEALs or Marines with him, but he was going door to door with his troops. And it says that he was ravaging the church. This is in Acts 8:3. Saul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. He wasn't knocking. Is there any nice Christians who want to come up for a little debriefing, and start chatting? It says that he dragged them out, both men and women. And you can just imagine the cries of the children, the spouses screaming for the love of women. Paul and his troops, they just barge in, right? And the men that feel dishonored. This is the Paul that wrote most of the New Testament, right? It's just a radical conclusion that he'd come to. Paul truly believed, though, that his conclusion about Christ was accurate. And he was absolutely insatiate, meaning he just could not get enough. He was so fueled by this decree to go out and rid the earth of Christianity. In Acts 8:22, verses 3 through 5, he looks back and he wrote this of himself. He says, I, being zealous for God, as all of you are to this day, I persecuted the way to death, binding and delivering to prison both men and women, as the high priest and the whole council of elders can bear me witness. From them I received letters to the brothers, and I journeyed toward Damascus to take those who were there and bring them in bonds to Jerusalem to be punished. Paul's conclusion was that every Christian should be in the same grave as their follower, the person they were following, Christ. But what he hadn't realized yet is that the grave was empty from Christ, and spiritually speaking, the grave of those that he murdered was emptied as well. So here's my question to you. How can a man so filled with rage, so filled with hate, absolutely determined of his conviction about who Christ was, have such a radical new conclusion? Amen. It's love. Love makes you do crazy things. Say that with me.
Love makes you do crazy things.
How many would attest to that? Yeah. And it's even when love is being torn away. I mean, I've seen this firsthand. Also in my family with life experiences I've gone through. Right? When love is being torn away from people, our minds get compromised. People start acting really weird, desperate, depression. All kinds of things kick in. Our minds become compromised because love is being stripped away from us. The very opposite, though, is true, because when we receive love, we can go absolutely crazy as well. I mean, I was once a bachelor living in the wild. I mean, lying, just, all on my own, bachelorhood, in my undergarments all day, no shaving required, fried food, ice cream, anytime I wanted. And some pretty little Christian lioness comes stumbling into my life. Got me to get down on my knees and beg for her to marry me. I don't have to beg, but that's love, man. Say it again. It makes you do crazy things. I changed a lot about my life, though. My way of thinking started changing. My attitude towards women, matrimony, kids started changing. My days, they began and they ended with her. Everything I was doing, making decisions, whether they were big or little, I had to take her into consideration. And likewise, her the same for me, I hope. But we were starting to become one. There was a union that was being bonded because we were no longer living just with ourselves in mind. Within months, though, of meeting my would-be wife, I found even a greater love than hers that made me even crazier. Something so profound, because it was an unthinkable kind of love. It wasn't the tender love of a woman. It wasn't the tender love of a mother or the tender love of a child. It was the love that was becoming made aware of me of that I had a Creator that, in partnership with the obedience of Christ, sacrificed and died a brutal death to free me of my ultimate bondage of sin.
Hallelujah.
and to give me eternal bliss in His eternal presence forever. And upon this conclusion, I started changing. The love that I received changed me from my core. I could not keep quiet about my faith, nor could I go back to the way of living. I was no longer just living for myself again. I lost my old friends because of it. My habits started changing. I got rid of a lot of those habits. Eventually all of them, except for my ice cream habit. It's ration. Now it's just ration with my wife. And my thinking again started changing. I made a rather large transition. It wasn't all overnight, right? But by a new conclusion about the love of Christ allowed me to stop living for myself and start living for Him. The concerns I had for this world were no more because my worldview back then was materialistic, and now things have been changed. And not of my own power. It was the driving force of love. There was an agent that was compelling me or controlling me to do so. My decisions in life were now influenced by this new conclusion, this new decision that I had made. In a similar fashion of how Kathy and I became one and started living with each other in mind, I was becoming one with Christ. Paul had this same experience, and so should every Christian should experience this. Jesus says that prayer in John 17:21, I believe, where we all become one, as He is and the Father is one. There's just that natural process that should happen as a result of the agent of love. But we start living for Christ naturally because of the powerful influence of His love. I'm telling you, man, His love can make you do some crazy things. The context for our passage today, Paul was actually defending his ministry. Scholars had come in and were telling the Corinthian church that Paul and his team of ministers were living worldly. Think about this now. The Corinthian church has known what Paul's been through. And yet they take some opinion from some people that come into the church and start saying, how this guy has been living. And Paul has to remind them and says, man, why don't you draw your own conclusions? We just came through Asia, he says in 1:8, or in 2 Corinthians 1:8, he says, the affliction we experienced in Asia, we were so utterly burdened beyond the strength that we despaired life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. And then just before he concludes his letter to them in chapter 11, he says, I have far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, and often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the cities, danger in the wilderness, dangerousness at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure, and apart from all other things, there is the daily pressure of me and my anxiety for all of the churches. Yet he says in 5:14 and 15, he says, but it's the love of Christ that controls me to live differently. I don't even have the ability to not live any differently because I'm so compelled to live for Christ. It doesn't matter, all of this. I have no other choice. It's the powerful, controlling force of Christ's love. I'm telling you, man, love makes you do crazy things. Love demands, and I would even say commands sacrifice. Unconditional love, as Pastor Tom has been teaching on, I think, is agape love. It doesn't look at the impact of what I am losing because of all that I am gaining. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It doesn't look at I because of all that I am gaining. If your child's in the middle of the road, even just like on this preview here, right? There was a complete stranger, that ride where that guy goes and tries to save that child's life. Any one of us in that situation, we don't contemplate our own life, right? If my child is out in the middle of 65 right there, I'm not looking for traffic. Even if it means imminent death for me, I'm not going to contemplate what it means. I'm going to go straight out there and grab that child and throw him off, right? It's the influence of love. It's a sacrificial instinct that we have because of love. It draws us to that conclusion. And without a doubt, I'm sure I could ask anybody in here if you would be willing to die for your child, and this room would be raised with hands. When we are confronted and living under the influence of Christ's love, we can freely give up ourselves in order to live for Him. This isn't even just a human perspective. God understands how love demands sacrifice as well. He knows what it means to be compelled to sacrifice something. Christ wasn't just sitting on the throne and said, a couple thousand years from now, I'm not doing anything. I think I might go help them poor critters down there, right? It was as instinctive as jumping out of the boat to save a drowning child. And Christ saw us drowning in our sins, being pushed under by the waves of Satan's oppression. He said, Father, we're doing this. We're doing this. It wasn't a contemplation and working out, this and that, and maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. It was, put me in, coach. I'm ready to play today. And from that moment, all the details of everything were worked out for the sacrifice to be completely finished.
Thank you, Father.
Love creates sacrificial living. And this is the powerful understanding that Paul had and why he was willing to give up everything and start living for Christ amongst all the scoffers and the sufferings. It's also what brought him to come to the same conclusion in a different passage of Scripture. In Galatians 2:20, he says, a very famous passage, I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. He said, even in this passage, Paul was expressing that love was the ultimate agent that drove him to live differently. Who loved me and gave himself for me. If we read that backwards or inverted, therefore I have been crucified. It wasn't out of his own passions and desires, rather he was compelled or controlled, as he says in 2 Corinthians 5:14. And therefore his whole life has changed. He died to himself and was living for Christ. If you're stuck trying to do something in your own path, that's something that you're not passionate about, it's hard to be motivated. Right? My kids, they have no passion to go do the chores that I ask them to. But if it's something about gaming, they're on it, right? Their heart's in it, their mind, everything is, they're wound up for this. Likewise, if we're trying to live from Christ from our mind or from our own strength, we're not going to be as effective as if we're living under the influence of Christ's love. It motivates us and controls us. As Paul says, it's the organic fuel that inspires us to live differently. It's also what allows us to live as though we have been crucified with Christ, as Paul said in 2:20. And that is to put ourselves, our old side, our old way of living, to start shedding off our old selves. It's no surprise that we have a lot of different critters down in Texas, and most of you guys know Mary Beth, I think, but she had made a post on Facebook a month back, and she was talking about all the mice she has and the mouse problem she has in the middle of Wisconsin. And I, being a nice friend, I offered her some suggestions. I said, maybe you should move down to Texas because we don't have any mice thanks to all the snakes. And she didn't find that too humorous, but I went from being absolutely terrified of these creatures, because everybody in Texas, it doesn't matter where you are, you think every snake is venomous. Right? You see a snake, it's deadly, it's going to kill me. And so I was kind of terrified of these guys. I was dreaming, like every night I would have a dream, I got a snake chasing me, and it's crazy. And so I was on a mission, because I just hadn't registered, the sensation hasn't registered. I had not been confronted yet with a rattler or anything. And so I started doing some research, and I'm on a Facebook page now for our North Texas snake identification. I've really just come to appreciate these things. They're absolutely amazing and beautiful. They are. I know it's a weird new hobby, but I haven't brought any snakes home yet.
Yeah.
And the kids have really started liking them too. Everybody was scared at first, but everybody's really coming all around to liking them. And we found some small ones in our yard. Kids have been playing with them. There's little yard snakes, and we haven't had any major confrontations. Well, in our little area, in our development, we have private access to a lake. It's a little fenced in. It's not that nice. It's not like we have our own private lake. It's just a little fenced in area to keep all the riffraff out, I guess. And there's a long dock that goes out to the lake, and it's got a covered awning. And so we built a rope swing off of that. We used it a couple times. Well, then this last summer we went back, and we're all standing on the dock, and Isaiah just comes bolting down probably from the doors there. And he's just running. I don't know why kids do that. They think they can't get enough speed unless they're like 300 feet. By the time they get there, they're actually slower than they were. Yeah.
So
anyways, he does this 100-yard dash down and grabs the hand on the rope swing. And right as he launches out, everybody's screaming, snake, water moccasins. And everybody thinks this is a poisonous snake comes out. And so poor Isaiah, he's now stuck hanging on this thing, looking out, and he sees this snake coming out. But luckily, his dash from the 100-yard dash, that momentum brought him, and he actually came back, and we were able to put him back on. It was a harmless water snake, but still, it was frightening for him and everybody else. And it was my first time seeing a real live snake on the water. But his dash is what scared the snake out of there, so it's probably good. Anyways, later then we even found a snake skin, and Galatia has been collecting some things for the zoo. They get points. And I went through the process of what the snake goes through to shed its skin. And do you know the primary reason why snakes shed their skin? It's to allow for further growth and to remove the parasites that have attached to their old skin. They literally leave behind their old shell in order to create a new, cleaner one that they can kind of grow into. And if you have some time, watch the video on YouTube. It's beautiful and neat. But they get a branch. They get up on a branch and they start this little dance and move. No, it's not that pretty. You like the dancing. But they find a rock and a stick, and they just kind of pull it off like a sock. It's inside out. So it's absolutely beautiful. It's in most cases the entire shell of the snake. But Christians, we kind of go through the same process. We have a shedding process. Do you know that we shed, humans, like 1.6 pounds of skin per year? By the time you're 70, you'll have 110, 115 pounds of that fluffy white snow or snow skin flakes in your house, collectible in your couches, chairs, and beds. You can make yourself a year-round snowman that could live and just be decor. That's a tailor-made snowman right there. Well, I gotta somehow go back and be spiritual about this. But our bodies and minds, right, they were spoiling away filled with various spiritual parasites that hindering us to grow into the creatures that God intended us to be. And once we come to the same conclusion that Paul did, and we start living under the influence of Christ, we begin our shedding process to expose Christ and to start living for Him. Right? We use a branch too. It's the branch of Jesse. It's the living branch of Jesse as one of the names of Christ. It's also the rock of our faith, the cornerstone. And we start that rubbing process. And He starts peeling off all of that.
Amen.
Our old skin is shedding of our skin. And when we look back, though, just like that snake, we look back and we see who we once were. We have the imprint. We see that imprint of who we once were, and even more so of who we're becoming. And we see how our lives have changed. In the same way that the snake doesn't go back to try to fit into its shell, we don't do that either. We don't go around here and pick up all those little pieces of skin and pick them back up. We don't, in the same way, we don't go back to our spiritual life or our previous life and try to walk in some old carcass that we don't fit into, nor do we belong in anymore.
Amen.
Right? We'll bring this down to a conclusion and ask you a question this morning. My question to you this morning is, for you to maybe just take with you this week, is to ask yourself, are you living under the influence of Christ's love? There's a lot of influences out there in this world. And we're living under influences, whether you know it or not. You need to identify what influence you're being influenced by, which influence you're living under or by. And if it's not living under the influence of Christ, your walk is going to be a lot more difficult. It's so much more natural. If you are compelled and controlled by the love of Christ, if you have the awareness of Christ's love, living for Him becomes just natural. It's just absolutely natural.
Yes.
You're living under the influence of Christ.
Yes.
The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard said in the Comments of Faith, he says, as you have lived, so have you believed. What he's saying there is that your way of living identifies with what you believe.
Amen.
If we're controlled by the love of Christ, we live for Him and not for ourselves. Or maybe you, like Paul in his younger years, have a different conclusion about who Christ is. It's always a good time to make a new conclusion on who Christ is. Like Paul had an absolute radical conversion and conclusion. He had a false conclusion. And now he's been enlightened and has seen and has a new conclusion. And he's compelled now to live for Christ. It's fitting this time of year to look back and contemplate what has transpired over the past year and what actions you might consider to impact your life differently in the coming year. And as a word of encouragement, it's beautiful to know that every spoken word and every spoken deed is already in the past, whether it's for good or for bad. It's already in the past. The same breath, the breath we're taking right now, the thoughts we're thinking, they're already making their way into history or into the past. And what this means is that any given moment, we have the ability to change the course of history simply by coming to a new conclusion or realization of how much Christ absolutely loves you.
Amen.
The moment you come to this realization or conclusion, you begin your transition. The dying process, the shedding process starts. And living for Him who was pierced for our transgressions becomes so natural. Just 2 verses down from our main passage in 2 Corinthians 5:14, it's actually in verse 17, chapter 5, Paul says, "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come." The past is in the past, and tomorrow is full of hope. And my prayer for you this coming year is that we all lean into Christ. We fall head over heels and allow His love to influence us to the point where we choose not to live for ourselves, but for Him.
Amen.
Make 2016 a year of transition and shed some of that old skin. I want to conclude with this one prayer from Paul. We'll personalize it here in Ephesians 3:17, verses 20. "I pray that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth, what is the length, what is the height, and what is the depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God." Let's bow and we'll pray. Father, we thank you so much for the sacrificial love, God, and the testimonies we have of the Bible, the people, Lord, that have gone before us, who have suffered so much, to give us a reflection, Lord, of the ultimate cost of following you, God. In America, we have different struggles, Lord, but nonetheless they are struggles. We just pray, Father, that your love this coming year would overwhelm us, Father, and it would be the driving force that controls us, compels us, springboards us to transition into a new, deeper, greater relationship with you. Father, help us in our shedding process, that we might get rid of the old to expose the new, to expose you, Father. Thank you for each person in here, Lord. We trust you and we love you, Lord, in Jesus' name.